We don't have a viewer yet. I'll wait until someone pops in. We're live. Okay. Welcome to the Chasing Perfection pregame show. UConn women's basketball taking on Syracuse in the second round of the NCAA tournament tonight, 9 p.m. late game on ESPN at the Alamo Dome. Daniel Connolly here with Megan Gower in Connecticut, not in San Antonio. So a lot to talk about. First, we're just going to talk about the High Point game first because just looking at how UConn got here, 16 seed, we predicted it wouldn't be a very close game. UConn ended up surpassing that 29.4 expected victory margin. It was a weird game. I don't really know the proper way to describe it, but it almost didn't feel like a real game. The best way I described it to someone was it almost felt like you were watching like a video game being simulated because I don't know. It was just such a weird feeling around the whole thing. Maybe it was the bubble. Maybe it was the fact that they hadn't played in a little while. But I don't know. Did you feel the same way with that?
Yeah, it felt a little odd. I don't know. Maybe it was just that they went into the post so much, and maybe we don't see them do that as much. But yeah, it felt weird. I agree with that.
Yeah, so UConn wins pretty easily, obviously. Paige Beckers scores 2 points in the first quarter and then ends up finishing with a team-high 24. And I thought Chris Daly had a really interesting answer after the game where she said that Paige has just the second gear that she can get to. And the more that she thinks she's getting fouled and the more physical the other team is playing with her, the quicker she gets there, which is a little interesting, a little backwards with what you'd think with a player like Paige who's not really the biggest build, is on the slighter side. And I think it's interesting that it seems like the physicality kind of gets her going instead of someone who maybe would shy away from that contact. But I feel like it's a really good sign that she comes out that first game, even if it took her a little ways to get going. Heard Gino in her ear yelling that her first NCAA tournament game, there were no signs of anything, nerves or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. She comes out and does exactly what she's been doing all season, which is exactly what UConn needs, right? They need her to play at that level all through this tournament. So to see her do it in the first game, clearly not really fazed by the environment of being in that NCAA tournament, which I think expected, right? We saw her do the same thing in the Big East tournament. So just the next level stage, but she doesn't really seem to get fazed by anything. But to see that happen on the highest stage is a good sign for UConn here.
Right. And then especially when we start talking about Syracuse in a little bit, the way that Olivia Nelson-Ododa and Aaliyah Edwards performed. I mean, Aaliyah Edwards comes in first NCAA tournament game, and she just really dominates in the post, completely outmatches High Point, gets a double-double. Olivia Nelson-Ododa finishes second on the team with 22 points. It was, I mean, obviously they were like trees among shrubs in that game, but it's still good to see them dominate against such a small team when there's been times where they haven't done that throughout the year.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was the first time that Liv scored over 20 points since back in December. She really hasn't had that dominant performance in a while, so that was definitely good to see. And then, yeah, Aaliyah Edwards, High Point just had no one that could guard her or any answer for her. She just kind of bullied her way in the paint through the game, and no one had any response for that.
I don't think there's many more entertaining games than the ones where Aaliyah Edwards just makes like the other team look like little children. I mean, it's hilarious that she's a freshman and she's just, I mean, I really don't know a better word to say than just bullying. Like that is the standard definition of bullying, is what Aaliyah Edwards does to these smaller teams. It's just, especially when you get to the end of games when UConn's up like 35 and the other team's already like very clearly checked out, and she's just still throwing bows, throwing her shoulder into other players. I think they showed one replay on the broadcast where like 3 different High Point players tried to box Aaliyah Edwards out, and Aaliyah Edwards just went over all of them, grabbed it, and then finished through them. It was just like, it's 1 year with the Aaliyah Edwards era, and it's already a vintage Aaliyah Edwards play.
Yeah, exactly. I think she's just going to be so crucial for UConn. I mean, in this game, but all the way down in the stretch of their tournament run, because there's not many teams in the country that are going to have anyone that can really compete with her inside. There's a handful of players in the country that can, but until UConn gets to the later stages, she's kind of just going to be able to have her way.
Yeah, definitely. Someone that UConn isn't going to have tonight, Nika Mule, already ruled out of this game with the ankle injuries that she sustained against High Point. It is just an ankle sprain from what we've been told by Chris Daly. She was questionable coming into the game. I was honestly pretty surprised that she isn't playing because It felt like a very similar injury compared to the one that she suffered in the Big East tournament. If anything, it seemed like a better situation for her. I mean, I think they showed at the end of the game, Mule was walking without crutches. She obviously didn't break it. They were able to move it back and forth on the sideline. They had an X-ray machine at the Alamo Dome, so I imagine it got X-rayed. And the fact that she played the immediate next day in the Big East tournament, which I feel like it's a similar situation where UConn really didn't need Nika Mule for that game. She didn't need to play it. She was still out there. She was healthy enough to be out there. They don't really need her tonight against Syracuse, I don't think. So I just don't really believe that it's a precautionary thing based on how the way it went in the Big East tournament. And also the fact that she had an entire day off between the High Point game and today and still isn't ready to go. And it's a 9 p.m. tip. That's a long day to try and get it ready. That doesn't make me feel very good about the potential severity of the injury.
Yeah, that doesn't sit well with me either. I think there's probably something more going on there. I'm sure we won't get much of an update until the next game, but I guess it could be precautionary in that, I mean, in the Big East tournament, right, they probably didn't need her in any of those games, and then they were going to have almost 2 weeks off before they had to play again. That's not so much the case here, and they definitely want to have her this weekend if they can, so maybe it is more precautionary just in that, you know, they don't really need her tonight. They do want her on either Saturday or Sunday when they play, so less kind of turnaround time there in between.
Right. I mean, that is a good point. There are much larger aims with this tournament. And also with the Big East tournament, you knew you were going to have that 2-week break after you finished for her to completely rest up, heal. So even if maybe she re-injured it in that semifinal game or she couldn't go 100%, she was still going to have the time to rest. But with the NCAA tournament, it's the end of the season if you don't advance. So, yeah, I think you can play around a little bit with this Syracuse game. I mean, you wrote it in your preview. Her hoop stats rates Syracuse as a very, very similar team to High Point. So I really kind of it won't be the same game because they're different teams, but I still don't think they're going to give UConn much of a challenge. Even still, it is a big loss for UConn not to have her. She's been so instrumental in helping revive, transform, improve their defense. Gino credited her with improving the communication. She's obviously such a tough on-ball defender. She's really good at picking the pocket of opposing players. And then on offense, she brings the ball up, allows Paige to play off the ball and kind of float around more freely. So it's going to be a loss, but it's also one that at least, as long as it's not something season-ending or anything like that, it's definitely one that UConn can sustain for this one game.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think they'll miss her tonight with, you know, Syracuse is prone to turnovers. She's someone that forces turnovers a lot, so they're going to miss her hands on defense, and they'll miss her defensive presence. But I don't think they're in a situation with this game where they need her on the court to get the win going into this weekend. That might be more the case. So hopefully it's not something that's going to keep her out for too long.
Right, and then assuming they win this game, they'll have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then probably play Saturday, and then you'd imagine that game on Saturday is going to be later just to fit it into the primetime slot. So it's a good amount of time to rest. It would be good to get her back for that a Sweet 16 matchup, potential Sweet 16 matchup against Caitlin Clark, which we'll be able to talk about all week on Chasing Perfection, the full podcast. But for now, let's focus in on Syracuse. Pretty interesting team, led by star point guard. Let's see if I can get this name right. We practiced it like 5 times before we started recording. I got it wrong 4 times. So Tiana Mangakaya.
Close enough.
That's as close as we're going to get. Super quick. I was watching her highlights yesterday. Really good at just kind of exploiting the gaps in the defense. Has just a lightning quick pull-up jumper. Just kind of flies around the court. I feel like even with Nika available, Tiana was going to be a lot for UConn to try to handle.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the best point guards in the country for sure. Senior for Syracuse. She's Nancy Lieberman Award finalist. Averages 7.4, I think it is, assists per game, which is second in the country. So just really kind of the key to their offense, and going to be kind of, I think, the most important matchup for UConn in this one. I think they need to contain her. I think that's going to be the most important thing for them. So she's definitely going to be a player to keep an eye on. She could give UConn a little bit of trouble, and I think Kristen Williams, the Westbrook, and Paige Beckers are going to have their handful kind of guarding her in the backcourt.
Right. Well, that was just what I was about to ask you is, do you think they put Kristen Williams on her? Because obviously Williams is their best on-ball perimeter defender. Or do you maybe try and mix and match something different? Maybe do we see a lot of Aubrey Griffin just because Griffin can kind of match her quickness? I feel like it's not so much that I don't think that Williams can defend her. It's just I don't really know if they've played anyone similar just in terms of that quick twitch ability, that explosiveness. Maybe Lauren Park Lane for Seton Hall. That's, I feel like, the only kind of comparable from what I've seen, but it's just kind of a tough matchup because UConn, I don't really feel like has anyone that's really in that same athletic mold.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a bit different matchup than they've seen this season. I'm sure Kristen Williams is going to be part of it, but I could see Avina Westbrook being a big part of that defense too. I think she was really stepped it up when Nika went out in the last game against High Point, and I could see kind of that being her defensive assignment tonight. And then, like you said, Aubrey Griffin, they're going to have to use their bench a little bit more without Mules, so Aubrey Griffin off the bench, especially if they're having trouble. I could see Aubrey playing some sizable minutes tonight.
Right. It will be interesting to kind of see how that lineup shakes out. I mean, Mule's also one of their top passers, so I wonder if that also means more time for Anna Makarat, who really hasn't provided a whole lot offensively, but for the most part, at least based on the minutes she's playing, her assists are kind of hanging at where they were before she got injured, but that will be kind of something interesting to watch. We'll have predictions a little later on, but first, just to continue on with Syracuse, they also have arguably UConn's biggest, well, not their biggest big challenge of the season, but in terms of these non-high major teams, these non-top 5 teams, Camila Cardoso, 6'7". I mean, I think just size-wise, she's probably the largest player that UConn's played. I feel like that's going to be a really good test for Olivia Nelson-Ododa and Aaliyah Edwards because, I mean, you look at the way Olivia Nelson-Ododa started the season. She had double figures in, I forget how many of consecutive games to start the year. And then they played Providence, who had Mary Baskerville, who definitely had size, wasn't as talented as Nelson-Ododa. But even just the fact that Providence had that size seemed to fluster Nelson-Ododa a bit. And she didn't have that great of a game. I think we've kind of seen throughout the year that when another team does have a lot of size, Nelson-Ododa has a much harder time getting to the basket. I think maybe she falls back a little too much on trying to shoot from the outside instead of getting inside. So I'm just very interested to see how Nelson-Ododa handles Cardoso, and then just also that how Aaliyah Edwards factors into it as well.
Yeah, I think Edwards is going to be key here because I think she's still going to have that kind of physicality advantage inside. I think she's going to be able to have a strong presence in the paint still, but I am very curious to see how Olivia Nelson-Ododa handles it, especially because, like you said, we've seen her kind of struggle when the other team has size throughout the season. So I think tonight is probably a better barometer than the High Point game to see kind of where she's at going into as they get later into the tournament, assuming they win tonight and have some bigger matchups for her. I'm also interested to see how UConn's offense in general adapts to it because against High Point, they scored 60 points in the paint. They just went inside a lot. I don't think they can still go inside tonight, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that as easily. So I think they're going to need to find some ways to get it going from the mid-range and from outside. So that's something to keep an eye on as well.
Right. I think if it was not at 50%, it was right around 50% of their total shots were layups. So it was similar in the Big East tournament. I keep referencing it, but it does feel very similar to those first 2 Big East tournament games. I mean, UConn really didn't even try to shoot outside yesterday. I mean, when they had the look, they took it, but for the most part, their focus was on getting the ball inside. So I feel like it's a little tough to try and judge just how much of their outside game is clicking right now because we just didn't see it. And I think it'll also just be interesting to see how the Alamo Dome's depth and the size, the cavernous nature of the arena, or I feel like a stadium is a better word for it, if that factors in, if it affects UConn's 3-point shooting. So, yeah, it'll be just an intriguing matchup because UConn's not going to be able to just bully Syracuse inside. They're not just going to be able to throw the ball in every single time and basically get a layup like they did against High Point. So I feel like a big factor is going to kind of come down to not only the way Paige Becker shoots, because I think Paige Becker's, even last game, she's very consistent from wherever she shoots. But I think a lot of it's also going to come down to Avina Westbrook, who only took 3 3-pointers on the night. Kristen Williams, who didn't do a whole lot from the mid-range outside game. Those 2 players I feel like are going to also just be very key on top of the 2 bigs, just because I feel like even though Nelson-Ododa might not have the best game, and she's definitely struggled against some of these bigs, she seems to have settled into a point at the very least where she's contributing in the post. And I think we saw it in the Big East championship game against Marquette. I think she only had 5 points, but she had a very high number of assists too. She was still very much helping out, not like that Arkansas game where she was just benched and not even out there. So like, I feel pretty good that Aaliyah Edwards and Olivia Nelson-Ododa are going to be able to make some headway down there. But really, not that UConn's in danger of losing, but I feel like their outside shooting is going to be the difference between UConn winning by maybe 10, 15, and then winning by 25, 30.
Yeah, I think the other big thing is going to be getting out in transition. Syracuse does turn the ball over a fair amount, and Tiana also averages close to 5 turnovers a game for those 7 assists. So if they can turn her over and just turn Syracuse over in general, that'll allow them to get some easy buckets, which can, again, I don't think they're in danger of losing if they don't do it, but helps them kind of win this by maybe a little bit more than expected.
So just got 15 minutes about to tip. Still no starting lineup. So before the starting lineup comes out, who's your prediction for who fills in for Nika Mule in that 5th spot?
I feel like we probably see Aaliyah Edwards to start. They've got the bigger post presence at Syracuse, so I think they put her and Olivia Nelson-Ododa in the post to start, but I wouldn't be surprised to see kind of a split in that role between her and Anna Makarat to kind of keep the passing ability going too.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like it's going to be Aaliyah Edwards because I think it's been pretty clear over these last few weeks that Aaliyah Edwards is definitely that 6th player in the rotation. She's the first one off the bench. The only thing that might change that is if they just like her coming off the bench and like the energy that she brings and just being able to just go up on a team by 5, 6 points and then just kind of send a bulldozer in there to just make it an even wider lead. I feel like if it's not Aaliyah Edwards, I would probably guess that it's going to be Anna Makarat instead of maybe Aubrey Griffin. I think even if Anna does start, Aubrey will probably end up getting more minutes total. But just in terms of replacing Nika 1-for-1, Anna is a much closer, not replica, but she just has a closer skill set with her passing ability. And yeah, she doesn't have the defense, but I feel like the drop off from Anna to Nika, at least in terms of the offense, wouldn't be too steep if she's in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we could see her in the starting lineup as well. If it's not Aaliyah Edwards, it will probably be Makarat. I think how much Aubrey Griffin plays tonight is going to be a factor of like how easily UConn goes up. If they go up big in the first quarter, I don't know how much of Aubrey Griffin we see, but I think if they, are struggling with Tiana or just struggling in general, Aubrey Griffin is always that player, right, that you can put into the game. She's going to get the steal. She's going to shake things up. So if that's the case, I think we'll see a lot more minutes from her.
Right. Well, I don't really understand why Aubrey Griffin didn't play more last game. I think she had 9 points and 7 rebounds, if I'm remembering right, in a limited amount of minutes. It wasn't too many. I wanted to say it was single-digit minutes, maybe 9 minutes. I don't have the stats right in front of me right now, but it was very, very efficient. She made a very big impact. I don't know if maybe it's just they're trying to keep her focused by putting her in for shorter frames of time. Maybe just, like you said, the matchup really isn't right, but Aubrey Griffin, I feel like, has been quietly playing very well, and she's definitely evolved from her form last year, whereas I think earlier in the year when she was playing well, it still looked like the freshman Aubrey, but last year, Aubrey Griffin never posted up, got the ball, made a move, and then got to the basket. That was just not something we saw. It was almost all just getting the ball at the three-point line and either slashing or just flying in, grabbing rebounds, and getting the second chance baskets. So I think this could be a game where Aubrey Griffin plays more, not because of the matchup, not because Nika Mule's out, but just because she's playing better and she's earning these minutes more, because it just didn't make sense why she played so little in the first round.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought she was fantastic when she was on the floor against High Point, so I was surprised to not see her get more minutes there. I think the other thing with Griffin in this game, too, is if Olivia Nelson-Ododa is struggling inside, Griffin's kind of a player that she doesn't have the size advantage inside, but she has the athleticism to get in there and get rebounds, and I could see her playing that role some tonight as well.
So we actually do have the starting lineup live here on the pregame show. It is Aaliyah Edwards in the starting lineup. No changes elsewhere. It's Paige Beckers, Olivia Nelson-Ododa, Aaliyah Edwards, Kristen Williams, and Davina Westbrook. So, yeah, that honestly makes sense. Aaliyah Edwards has been their sixth player in the rotation. So it'll be interesting to see how that matches up against Syracuse. I know last pregame show we spoke about whether or not UConn would get to predicted margin of victory from her hoop stats of, 24.1 last game?
I think it was like, I don't know, it was 20 something. I forget now.
I think it might actually be higher wider for Syracuse. So the predicted margin of victory is 24.4. Syracuse's largest loss of the season was 24 points. What's your over-under? Do you think they're going to have larger or less than a 24-point victory? Well, do you think they're going to win?
Well, I think they're going to win. I'm going to go with less than 24 points, especially with Nika being out. But I still figure probably close to 20 points, assuming things go well. So
I'm actually going to go over. I think Tiana's a good player, but I feel like UConn's just going to have a very good game plan for how to really frazzle her. She's going to turn the ball over a million times, and UConn's just going to go crazy on the fast break with all the turnovers that they get from that. So I feel like maybe it'll be a little close early on as UConn kind of tries to navigate without Nika Mule, but once it settles in, once it figures out what kind of game it can play against Syracuse, I feel like it's going to get out of hand pretty quickly. Feels like one of those games where there's going to be a vintage, 18-0 UConn run that just totally blows the door out on the game, and UConn just suddenly it'll go from a 5-point game to I can't do math. Let's just say 28-point game right over in the span of a few minutes.
I think that's fair. I think another thing I didn't think about when I was looking at that match too is the fact that they won by so much on Sunday with Kristen Williams only playing a handful of minutes in that first quarter too. She was out a lot with foul trouble, so they probably would have won that game by closer to 50, if not more, if they had been able to play her for most of the game too. So yeah, wouldn't be surprised to see it go over, but I'm still going to keep the under for now.
Right. Well, and it was such a weird game against High Point. It didn't feel like they were playing well. Then you looked up and it was a 30-point game. It was a 40-point game. They get ended as a 55-point game or something like that. I'm really bad with remembering. But it was a very wide margin that you wouldn't have necessarily guessed from if you didn't have a scoreboard in front of you. So I think the fact that UConn really didn't look great and still won by that much is a good sign, and it seems like something that's going to carry over tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going to bring that same energy tonight, and I don't think they're going to have any trouble getting the win again and move on to the Sweet 16.
Right. It's almost becoming tradition at this point to beat Syracuse in the NCAA tournament. Beat them in the national championship game in 2016. The very next year, beat them in the round of 32. They were also in an 8 seed. So another matchup with Syracuse. Actually, before we get into our final predictions, I just remember a funny Gino story. I don't remember how many years ago this was, but maybe it was around the time they played Syracuse the last time in the NCAA tournament, but UConn's won the last 25 meetings against Syracuse. I think the last Syracuse win came in 1996. Apparently somewhere in the Carrier Dome, or is that where Syracuse women's basketball plays?
I think so.
Okay, so whatever the Syracuse basketball facility is, they have one of those commemorative basketballs. They took one of the game balls, painted it, put the score on it, the date, all of that for beating UConn in the regular season. So I remember just Gino mentioning that one time a couple of years ago, and just having some classic Gino comment to go along with it.
Yeah, it's also Gino Oriama's birthday too, so there's no way they're losing.
That's true.
His birthdays.
Yeah. What is he? 65?
Maybe 65, 66, one of the two.
We'll look it up quickly. Gino Oriama. He turned 67. Oh, we really
wrong. I guess we should be able to guess that it was more than 65 because if he already had his second vaccine, he should have been over 65.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't think of that. No, that's a good call. Yeah, so just before we wrap up, got about 5 minutes to tip off. Give me one prediction for the game.
I think we see a better night from Kristen Williams, so guessing that she gets close to the 20-point mark tonight.
Okay. I'm going to continue with my theme of earlier and say that Aubrey Griffin has a good night. Let's say 15 and 10 for her, double-double.
Nice.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Chasing Perfection pregame show. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're on Twitter or on YouTube. Be sure to follow along with me and Megan throughout the game on Twitter. You can follow Megan at Megan Gower. You can follow me on Twitter at Daniel V. Connolly. Also, keep an eye on the UConn blog and Story Central after the game for all the coverage. Other than that,